The room felt different before anyone understood why. The courtroom was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, almost rehearsed. Not the respectful silence of procedure, but the uneasy kind that settled after something had already gone wrong and everyone sensed it, even if no one could yet explain it. At the defendant's table sat a black woman in her late 40s. Her posture was straight, controlled, almost formal, but the faint red marks around her wrists told a different story. The cuffs were gone now, yet their presence lingered like an echo. Her hands rested calmly on the polished wood, fingers interlaced, nails neat, unmoving. A faint bruise darkened the edge of her jaw, already turning from red to purple, as if time itself had decided to leave evidence behind. She did not look like someone waiting to be judged. She looked like someone waiting. Across the room, near the witness stand, a uniformed officer adjusted the collar of his shirt and smoothed an invisible crease from his sleeve. Officer Daniel Reed stood comfortably, weight shifted to one leg, chin lifted with practiced confidence. His badge caught the overhead lights as he moved, flashing briefly like a reminder of who the room usually belonged to. He glanced once toward the woman, then away, as if she were already resolved, already filed into the category of things that did not require further thought. The judge's bench loomed above them both, elevated, silent, watching. Papers lay neatly stacked. The seal on the wall looked down with blind indifference. Somewhere in the gallery, a chair creaked softly as someone shifted their weight, then froze, as if even that small sound felt inappropriate. No one spoke. The woman's eyes drifted slowly across the room. The clerk at her station avoiding eye contact. The prosecutor whispering to an aide, lips tight, voice low. A bailiff near the wall, arms crossed, his jaw clenched for reasons even he did not fully understand. There was a tension threading them together, thin but unbreakable, as if the air itself was holding its breath. She inhaled quietly and let it out just as slowly. Officer Reed cleared his throat. It was a small sound, barely noticeable, but it cut through the silence like a match struck in the dark. Heads turned. He straightened, ready, comfortable in the familiar rhythm of rooms like this. He had stood here countless times before. He knew how this went. He knew which words carried weight and which faces would nod before he even finished speaking. At the defense table, the woman did not look at him. Her gaze settled instead on the far wall, where a framed list of courtroom rules hung slightly crooked. She stared at it as if it mattered more than anything else in the room, as if it held an answer she was waiting to confirm. A faint murmur rippled through the gallery, then died just as quickly. Something about this felt off. Officer Reed felt it too, though he could not have said why. The confidence was still there, solid and familiar, but beneath it was a subtle irritation, like a radio stuck between stations. He shifted again, rolling his shoulders back, reminding himself that nothing about this was unusual. People like her always sat that way in the beginning, quiet, tight-lipped, performing dignity. It never changed the outcome. He glanced at the clock. The woman finally spoke, her voice low, steady, almost polite. "May I have a moment, Your Honor?" It was not defiant, not emotional, just measured. The judge paused, surprised by the tone more than the request. He nodded slowly. Officer Reed frowned. The woman lifted her eyes at last, not toward the bench, but toward the room itself. The way she looked around made several people uncomfortable, though none of them could say why. It felt less like a plea and more like an inventory, as if she were quietly taking note of who was present for what was about to happen. "I understand how this looks," she said. "I understand the assumptions that have already been made." Her eyes flicked briefly to the faint marks on her wrists, then away. "But I would ask that before anyone speaks for me, before anyone explains what they believe happened, that this room takes a breath." Officer Reed let out a short, humorless exhale through his nose. A breath, he thought. That was new. The judge leaned back slightly. The prosecutor hesitated. Somewhere in the back row, a court employee frowned, a slow recognition tugging at something she could not yet name. The silence returned, heavier now. No one in that room knew it yet, but the balance had already shifted. The mistake had already been made, not in anger, not in chaos, but in seconds, quiet and casual, the kind of disrespect that felt insignificant at the time. And soon, every person in that courtroom would understand exactly what it had cost. Earlier that morning, the courthouse had felt ordinary, predictable, the kind of place where nothing ever surprised Officer Daniel Reed anymore. He stood just outside the main entrance, coffee cooling in his travel mug, radio clipped neatly to his shoulder. The morning sun reflected off the glass doors, throwing pale light across the stone steps. Reed liked this position. Everyone passed through him. Lawyers rushing with briefcases, defendants already defeated in their posture, clerks who smiled politely but never asked his name. For 15 years, this had been his post, and in that time, he had learned something he believed down to his bones. Power did not need to be loud to be absolute. Reed had a system. He called it reading people, a glance at the way someone walked, how they held their shoulders, whether they met his eyes or avoided them. He trusted those instincts more than training manuals or policy updates. They had never failed him, or at least that is what he told himself. Most mornings were easy, routine checks, a few warnings, the occasional arrest when someone pushed too far. He knew the boundaries of this place better than anyone. Who belonged, who needed to be questioned, who needed to be reminded. Around 8:45, he noticed her. She approached from the sidewalk at a steady pace, not hurried, not hesitant. Mid to late 40s, black, dressed in a simple navy blazer and slacks, sensible shoes, a leather briefcase in her left hand, worn but well cared for. She did not look lost. She did not look nervous. That alone irritated him. No badge visible, no uniform, no security clearance hanging from her neck. Reed straightened instinctively. She did not glance at him right away. Her attention was on the courthouse doors, the building itself, as if she had seen it 1,000 times before, as if she expected it to open for her. That was when the label settled in his mind. Does not belong here. He had labeled people like that before, people who moved too comfortably through spaces they had not earned, people who assumed access instead of asking for it. He stepped forward, blocking her path just enough to force her attention without making it obvious. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, professional. "This entrance is restricted." She stopped, looked at him. Her eyes were calm, observant, unreadable. "I'm heading inside," she replied. "Not I need to get in. Not can you help me." Just a statement. Reed felt a flicker of satisfaction. There it was. The entitlement. He had been right. "Purpose of your visit?" he asked. She adjusted her grip on the briefcase. "I have business in the building." That was when his jaw tightened. Everyone had business, until they did not. Before he could respond, a voice came from behind him. Officer Miller, younger, newer, leaned slightly toward Reed as he passed. "Hey," Miller said quietly. "Just a heads up. There's a closed-door meeting scheduled this morning. Internal people. Admin level." Reed barely turned his head. "Yeah," he said. "Got it." Miller hesitated. "I think they said some higher-ups might be coming through." Reed waved him off. "Then they'll have ID." The woman stood patiently, listening, not interrupting, not explaining. That patience irritated him more than any argument would have. "ID," Reed said finally. She opened her mouth, then paused, as if deciding how much effort this moment deserved. "I can provide it," she said, "but there's no need for this to escalate." Escalate. The word landed wrong. Reed felt something shift inside him, a quiet resistance hardening into resolve. He had heard that tone before. People who thought calm words could move rules out of their way. People who believed respect was something owed automatically. "I'm telling you how this works," he replied. "You don't just walk into a courthouse." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'm aware how courthouses work." That was it. The confirmation he needed. He did not notice the way a clerk inside the glass doors glanced out, briefly curious, before returning to her desk. He did not hear Miller slow his steps, sensing tension but unsure why. All Reed felt was certainty. He had seen this play out before. A small push, a little authority. People folded, or they didn't, and then the system took care of the rest. Either way, the outcome was never in doubt. He squared his shoulders. "Step back," he said. She did not move. In that moment, Reed felt completely in control, the badge on his chest, the building at his back, the weight of 15 years of being believed without question. He did not see a professional. He did not see a colleague. He saw a problem that needed to be corrected, and he was certain that if he played his role, the system would play its part. It always had. The exchange lasted less than a minute. That was all it took. Officer Reed shifted his stance, planting his feet just wide enough to make a point. His voice dropped into that practiced tone, the one that sounded reasonable while closing every door at the same time. "You need to step away from the entrance," he said. "Now." Angela Brooks met his eyes. Up close, she could see the certainty in his expression. Not anger, not fear, assurance. The kind that came from knowing he would be backed no matter how this ended. "I'm not causing a disturbance," she replied evenly. "I'm scheduled to be inside this building this morning." Reed exhaled through his nose, the sound sharp and dismissive. "I didn't ask about your schedule," he said. "I asked you to leave." Her grip tightened slightly on the briefcase. She could feel the weight of the documents inside it, the work she had prepared, the meetings she was supposed to attend. All of it suddenly felt fragile, like it could be erased with the wrong word. "I'm happy to show you identification," she said, "but there's no reason for this to turn into something else." He cut her off before she could finish the sentence. "I'm not debating this with you." Reed snapped, his voice louder now, drawing attention. "You don't belong at this entrance. Step back." People slowed as they passed. A man in a suit glanced over his shoulder, curiosity flickering across his face before he looked away. A clerk paused just inside the doors, pretending to check her phone while listening. No one intervened. No one ever did. Angela felt the heat rise in her chest, not explosive, but heavy. The familiar weight of being misread, misjudged, reduced in real time. "I'm asking you to listen," she said quietly. "This is a misunderstanding." Reed's jaw tightened. There it was, the word that always irritated him. Misunderstanding. As if authority simply failed to grasp things sometimes, as if the problem was mutual. "I've listened enough," he said. Last warning. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She could feel the moment slipping, the point where reason no longer mattered. She had seen this before, from the other side of a bench, watching. Defendants realized too late that the room had already decided who they were. She chose her words carefully. "I'm not resisting you." Something flashed in Reed's eyes. He stepped closer, invading her space, lowering his voice so only she could hear it. "You don't get to decide that." The world seemed to narrow. The sounds of the street dulled. Angela became acutely aware of her own breathing, the way her heartbeat thudded against her ribs. She sensed movement behind Reed, other officers drifting nearer, not urgently, but with interest. Reed raised his voice again, this time for an audience. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hands where I can see them." A hush fell over the entrance. Angela felt every eye on her now, some curious, some uncomfortable, some already convinced she had done something wrong. For a split second she considered arguing, naming her position, ending this before it went any further. Then she saw it, the certainty on his face, the readiness, the way the system had already chosen him. She understood, with a clarity that settled deep in her bones, that speaking now would not protect her. It would only give him more to twist. So she did the one thing he did not expect. She went silent. She turned slowly, deliberately, set the briefcase down at her feet, placed her hands behind her back without being told again. The humiliation burned hotter than anger, hotter than fear. Around them, people watched, some with widened eyes, some with tight mouths, most with relief that it was not happening to them. Reed did not hesitate. The decision had already been made. In those few seconds, he chose control over curiosity, assumption over understanding, authority over listening. And Angela Brooks stood still, absorbing the weight of it all, knowing that this moment would not end here, not for him, not for the room, and not for the system that had just revealed itself without saying a word. The metal clicked shut with a sound that felt louder than it should have. Not sharp, not violent, just final. Angela Brooks felt the pressure settle around her wrists, firm and unyielding, as if the air itself had decided she was no longer free. The sensation was unfamiliar in practice, but deeply familiar in meaning. It carried history, memory, every story she had ever heard that ended with someone saying, "I didn't do anything wrong." She kept her face still. Officer Reed's voice cut through the quiet again, louder now, carrying purpose. "Ma'am, you're being detained for failure to comply." Failure to comply. The words hung there, clean and official, stripping the moment of its truth and replacing it with something easier to defend. Reed guided her a step forward, not roughly, not gently either, just enough to remind everyone watching who was in charge. Angela's heels scraped lightly against the stone. She felt eyes on her back, on her hands, on the cuffs that told a story long before anyone asked for facts. She did not look at the people passing by. She could feel their reactions without seeing them. A woman near the curb shook her head and kept walking. A man slowed, opened his mouth, then closed it again. Someone lifted a phone, pretending not to record. No one said her name. Reed spoke into his radio, his tone calm, practiced, almost bored. Got a non-compliant individual at the front entrance, requesting assistance. Non-compliant. Angela swallowed. She focused on her breathing. In through her nose, out through her mouth. Slow, controlled. She knew better than to cry, knew better than to plead. Those things never landed the way people hoped they would. The worst part was not the cuffs. It was the way the moment stripped her down to something smaller, less precise, less human. She could feel the room forming around her even before she was inside it. The story assembling itself without her input. Reed stepped around to face her again. Up close, she could see the faint smile at the corner of his mouth. Not cruel, confident. The look of someone who believed the hardest part was already over. "You should have listened," he said quietly. Angela met his gaze at last. "I did," she replied. "You didn't." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Not doubt, not regret. Annoyance, as if she had spoken out of turn, even now. He turned her toward the entrance. As they walked inside, the temperature changed. The air cooled. The echo of their footsteps bounced off marble and glass. The building swallowed them whole, indifferent to the shift that had just occurred on its steps. A clerk behind the security desk glanced up, startled, then quickly looked back down at her screen. Reed handed Angela off with a brief explanation, already shaping the narrative. Raised voice, refused instructions, potential disruption. Angela listened without reacting. She had learned long ago that there were moments when silence was not surrender. It was observation. It was restraint. It was survival. As she was guided toward a holding area, she caught her reflection in a darkened window. A black woman in professional clothes, hands cuffed behind her back, chin lifted just enough to keep her dignity intact. She felt the humiliation settle deep in her chest, heavy and sharp, all at once. Not because she believed she belonged there, but because she knew how easily others would believe she did. Behind her, Officer Reed straightened his uniform again. Everything felt orderly, controlled, and in those few seconds, without shouting, without chaos, without anyone asking the right question, a single act of disrespect had been chosen over listening. The room had not changed yet, but it would. The courtroom settled into its familiar rhythm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened outside its doors. Officer Daniel Reed stood at the witness stand, shoulders squared, hands resting lightly on the railing. From here, the room felt like home. He knew where to place his pauses, when to soften his voice, when to let authority do the work for him. "Describe what occurred this morning," the prosecutor said, pen poised above her legal pad. Reed nodded once, slow and deliberate. "At approximately 8:47, he began, "I observed the defendant attempting to access a restricted entrance without proper identification." Angela Brooks sat at the defense table, hands folded, eyes forward. She listened as if the words were not about her, as if the story being built had nothing to do with the morning she had lived. "She became agitated when I asked her to step back," Reed continued, "refused multiple lawful commands, raised her voice, drew attention from passers-by." Agitated, refused, commands. Each word landed cleanly, comfortably, familiar to everyone in the room. The prosecutor nodded, already fitting the pieces together. "Did you feel threatened?" "Yes," Reed replied without hesitation. Her behavior was unpredictable. She was hostile, non-cooperative. Judge Thomas Caldwell leaned forward slightly, hands clasped. His expression was thoughtful, measured. He had heard this cadence before. It rarely changed. "And your response?" the judge asked. "I followed protocol," Reed said. "Used minimal force necessary to ensure safety." Angela felt her jaw tighten. She kept her eyes on the table, on a small scratch in the wood that someone had tried and failed to polish out. She knew better than to react. Any visible emotion would be folded neatly into the narrative already taking shape. Across the room, a few heads nodded. Another one, their faces seemed to say. Another person claiming mistreatment when they did not get their way. The prosecutor glanced briefly at Angela, then back to Reed. "And the defendant's injuries." Self-inflicted during resistance, Reed answered smoothly. I attempted to de-escalate. She would not comply. Judge Caldwell nodded once, satisfied. At the defense table, Angela felt the weight of the room shift away from her, as if she were slowly being erased. Not loudly, not cruelly, just efficiently. This was how it happened. Not with shouting or outrage, but with agreement. A young court clerk seated near the side glanced down at the case file, then frowned. She read the name again. Angela Brooks. Something tugged at her memory. A meeting. A memo. A voice she had heard once in passing, firm but calm. She looked up at the woman sitting quietly at the table, and then back at the file, her brow furrowing. That can't be right, she thought. Behind her, near the back wall, an older security guard shifted his weight. He had worked in the building for over 20 years. He had seen faces come and go, judges retire, administrators promoted, staff shuffled quietly between floors. He studied Angela more closely now, the posture, the stillness, the way she listened without flinching. This doesn't sit right, he thought. Reed continued, warming to his testimony. I've encountered situations like this before. Individuals who believe rules don't apply to them. When they're held accountable, they claim victimhood. The prosecutor hummed softly in agreement. Angela closed her eyes for just a moment. She felt the anger press against her ribs, sharp and insistent. Not explosive, focused. The kind of anger that came from knowing exactly how wrong this was and how easily it was being accepted. When she opened her eyes again, she remained silent. The system was moving now, just not toward the truth. The prosecutor leaned back slightly in her chair, satisfied. The outline was clear now. Clean. Orderly. Your Honor, she said, turning toward Judge Caldwell. The state believes the officer acted appropriately under the circumstances. This appears to be a straightforward case of non-compliance escalating due to the defendant's behavior. Judge Caldwell nodded again, slower this time, as if weighing something heavier than the words themselves. I've seen this pattern before, he said. Authority challenged. Situation escalates. Unfortunate, but not unusual. Angela lifted her gaze. For the first time since entering the room, she looked directly at the judge. Not pleading, not angry, just present. Judge Caldwell met her eyes for a brief second, then looked away. At the defense table, Angela's attorney shifted uncomfortably, already sensing how narrow the path had become. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. We'll get our turn, he whispered. Just stay calm. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Across the room, the young court clerk could not let it go. She opened her laptop again and typed the name once more, slower this time. Angela Brooks. Her fingers paused. She remembered now. A training session months ago. A woman introduced without ceremony. Not a judge in robes. Not a politician. Just someone from administration who spoke about policy with quiet authority. Someone people listened to. The clerk glanced up again, heart beginning to race. The older security guard near the wall folded his arms tighter. He watched Reed as the officer stepped down from the stand, the confidence in his stride unmistakable. Reed did not look at Angela as he passed her. He did not need to. In his mind, the room had already spoken, but the guard had seen enough rooms to know when something was being forced into place. He leaned slightly toward another guard and murmured, "You recognize her?" The other man shrugged. "No." "Why?" The older guard hesitated. "I think I've seen her upstairs, not like this." Reed returned to his seat, adjusting his uniform once more. Everything felt right again. Predictable. The story had landed. The system was doing what it always did. Angela felt the weight of the moment settle fully now. Not just the accusation, but the assumption behind it. The unspoken agreement that this version of events made more sense than hers ever would. She understood something then, with painful clarity. This was not about what had happened outside. This was about who was allowed to be believed inside. She straightened her shoulders, drawing a slow breath. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something steadier, a patience sharpened by years of watching this exact machinery from the other side. Around her, the courtroom hummed softly with routine. Papers shuffled, a pen clicked, someone coughed. The system was fully engaged now, but it was moving in the wrong direction. And somewhere beneath the polished wood and official language, a fracture had begun to form. When it was finally her turn to speak, the courtroom did not expect much. Angela Brooks rose slowly from her chair. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, as if she were stepping into a space she already understood. The faint scrape of the chair legs against the floor sounded louder than it should have. A few people glanced up, curious, more than attentive. Judge Caldwell looked down at her, pen still in his hand. "Ms. Brooks," he said, voice neutral, procedural, "you may address the court." Angela nodded once. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her voice was calm, not trembling, not defensive. It carried easily through the room, steady enough to make several heads lift without quite knowing why. I would like to clarify a few points in Officer Reed's testimony. Reed's jaw tightened. He leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossing instinctively. This was usually the part where stories unraveled emotionally, where people contradicted themselves, where credibility collapsed under pressure. Angela did not rush. "First," she continued, "I was not attempting to access a restricted area. I was standing on a public entrance walkway, which is open to civilians during standard operating hours." Judge Caldwell paused, pen hovering. "I did not raise my voice," Angela said. "I did not refuse lawful commands. I offered to provide identification and requested clarification. That request was denied." Her eyes moved briefly toward Reed, then back to the bench. "Second," she said, "the assertion that I was non-compliant does not align with the sequence of events. Compliance requires an opportunity to comply. I was not given one." The room shifted, not dramatically, subtly. A few chairs creaked as people adjusted their posture. The young clerk stopped typing. Judge Caldwell frowned slightly. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "this is not the time for legal argument." Angela nodded again. "Understood, Your Honor. Then I will be brief." She drew a measured breath. "I am requesting that the court preserve and review all available security footage from the exterior and interior cameras covering the main entrance between 8:40 and 9 o'clock this morning." The words landed differently than anything she had said before. Reed's eyes flicked up. Angela continued, "This includes courthouse, surveillance cameras, and any body-worn cameras assigned to officers on duty at that time." The prosecutor straightened in her seat. "Your Honor," she began, "the state does not see the relevance of additional footage when we already have—" "With respect," Angela said gently, turning her head just enough to acknowledge the interruption without yielding to it. "Video evidence would clarify whether the officer's account aligns with observable fact." The courtroom went still. Judge Caldwell cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, do you have legal counsel advising you on these requests?" "I am aware of my rights," Angela replied, "and of the court's obligation to preserve potentially exculpatory evidence." That did it. The word exculpatory lingered in the air longer than it should have. Judge Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying her now. Not dismissively, not entirely comfortably either. Reed shifted again, his confidence no longer as effortless. His foot tapped once against the floor before he stilled it. Angela remained standing. "There is no harm," she said, "in allowing the facts to speak for themselves." For the first time since the proceedings began, no one rushed to fill the silence. The system hesitated, and in that hesitation, something unfamiliar began to surface. Doubt. The silence stretched longer than protocol usually allowed. Judge Caldwell shifted in his chair, eyes still on Angela Brooks. The pen he had been holding now rested untouched on the bench. For the first time that morning, he did not look certain of the next step. "You're asking this court," he said carefully, "to pause proceedings based on your assertion alone." Angela met his gaze. "I'm asking the court to verify the truth instead of assuming it." The words were not sharp. They were precise. That precision unsettled the room. Reed felt a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with anger. He told himself it was irritation. He told himself this was still under control, but his thoughts moved faster now, less orderly. Cameras, angles, timing. He replayed the entrance in his mind, searching for certainty and finding gaps where confidence used to be. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Your Honor, with respect, this is a common tactic. Delay, distraction. We have an officer's sworn testimony." Angela turned toward her then, not confrontational, just present. "Testimony is not evidence," she said. "It is a claim. Evidence either supports it or it does not." A murmur rippled through the gallery before anyone realized they had reacted. Judge Caldwell raised a hand, silencing it, though his expression had changed. His brows knit together, his mouth tightening as if he were weighing something heavier than procedure. "How familiar are you with courtroom standards, Ms. Brooks?" he asked. Angela did not hesitate. Enough to know that truth does not benefit from being rushed. That was when Reed felt it. Not fear exactly. Something colder, the sense that the ground beneath him was no longer as solid as it had been minutes earlier. He glanced toward the bailiff, then toward the security desk. No one was meeting his eyes. The older security guard near the wall was watching Angela intently now, not with suspicion, with recognition. The young clerk's fingers hovered above her keyboard, forgotten. She stared openly now, her earlier unease sharpening into certainty. She whispered to the clerk beside her, "I know that voice." Judge Caldwell exhaled slowly. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "your manner suggests a level of familiarity with this court that goes beyond the average defendant." Angela inclined her head slightly. "Respect for the court tends to do that." Reed swallowed. His mouth felt dry. The judge looked down at the case file again, then back up at Angela. The room waited. Even the air seemed to pause. "I will consider your request," Judge Caldwell said at last. The words landed softly, but their impact was immediate. Reed felt his stomach drop. Angela sat back down, folding her hands once more on the table. She did not smile. She did not look relieved. She looked patient, as if she had known this moment would come, and that it was only the beginning. Around her, something had shifted. The certainty that had filled the room earlier was thinning, replaced by questions no one had planned to ask. The system had slowed, just enough for truth to catch up. For the first time, the room was not watching the badge. It was listening to the woman who had been silenced. And for the first time, that silence was working in her favor. The screen flickered once before coming to life. A grainy image filled the monitor mounted near the judge's bench. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 8:46 a.m. The courthouse entrance. A murmur moved through the room, then faded into silence as the footage began to play. There was Officer Reed standing exactly where he had described, hands on his belt, posture relaxed, comfortable. There was Angela Brooks approaching from the sidewalk, briefcase in hand, her pace unhurried. At first, nothing looked remarkable. Then Reed stepped into her path. The audio came through clearly. "Ma'am, this entrance is restricted." A few people shifted in their seats. Angela's voice followed, calm, steady. "I'm heading inside." The room leaned forward without realizing it. Reed's tone sharpened. The pause before his next words stretched just long enough to feel intentional. "Purpose of your visit." On screen, Angela adjusted her grip on the briefcase. "I have business in the building." The prosecutor's lips pressed together. The video continued. Reed's body language changed. His stance widened. His shoulders squared. The subtle escalation was impossible to miss now that it was framed by truth instead of interpretation. "ID," he said. Angela nodded. "I can provide it." The camera caught the exact moment Reed interrupted her. His hand lifted. His voice rose. "I'm not debating this with you." A low sound moved through the gallery. Not quite a gasp. Not quite a whisper. The judge's face tightened. The footage rolled on unbroken. No edits, no gaps. "Step back." Angela did not raise her voice. She did not gesture wildly. She stood still. "I'm asking you to listen," she said. Reed leaned closer. Too close. "You don't get to decide that." The room froze. Someone in the back whispered, "Jesus." The video showed the seconds that followed. Angela turning slowly, setting her briefcase down, placing her hands behind her back without being told again. Compliance, silence, then Reed's voice again, louder now for everyone else to hear. "Turn around, hands where I can see them." The camera angle shifted slightly as another officer stepped into frame. No resistance, no aggression, just control moving in one direction. The judge lifted a hand. "Pause it." The screen froze on Angela's profile. Calm, chin lifted, eyes forward. The courtroom was no longer breathing as one. It was holding its breath individually, each person caught in their own realization. Judge Caldwell stared at the image for a long moment before turning his gaze to Reed. "Officer," he said slowly, "is this the same incident you described earlier?" Reed swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you see," the judge asked, "where the defendant became hostile?" Reed opened his mouth, closed it. It escalated quickly. Angela remained seated, hands folded. She did not look at the screen. The judge nodded once, then turned back toward her. Ms. Brooks. She stood again. Yes, Your Honor. There was a pause, a different kind this time, one filled not with dismissal, but with attention. Before we proceed further, Judge Caldwell said, "Is there anything you would like this court to understand?" Angela met his eyes. "Yes," she said, "there is." She reached slowly into her blazer and withdrew a slim leather folder. She held it at chest level, not raised, not dramatic. "I did not identify myself earlier because I wanted this court to see the interaction as it truly was," she said, "not filtered through titles or assumptions." Reed felt his pulse spike. Angela opened the folder and placed it on the table. "My name is Angela Brooks," she continued. "I serve as Deputy Director of Judicial Administration for this district." The words did not echo. They dropped. The courtroom went completely still. Someone's pen slipped from their fingers and clattered to the floor, the sound shockingly loud in the silence. Judge Caldwell's face drained of color. Reed stared, unblinking. Angela's voice did not change. "This building is my workplace. Those documents in my briefcase were case files for meetings scheduled this morning." She paused. "I did not speak earlier because I wanted the truth to stand without my position, standing in for it." No one spoke. No one moved. The truth had not changed what happened outside, but it had just changed everything inside. The silence did not break. It thickened. Judge Caldwell remained still, both hands resting on the edge of the bench, as if he needed something solid beneath him. He looked from the credentials on the table to Angela Brooks, then back to the frozen image on the screen. The order of things he had trusted all morning was quietly rearranging itself. "Deputy Director," he said at last, testing the words as if they might dissolve, "of Judicial Administration." "Yes, Your Honor," Angela replied, "for 14 years. A soft, involuntary sound moved through the gallery. Not disbelief, recognition. Reed felt the room tilt. His mind raced backward, replaying the morning with ruthless clarity. The confidence, the interruptions, the certainty that nothing about her required caution. He had not misheard. He had not misunderstood. He had simply assumed, and the system had assumed with him. "This court," Judge Caldwell said slowly, "was not made aware of this." Angela nodded. "That was my choice." Reed leaned forward, his chair scraping the floor. "Your Honor," he said quickly, too quickly, "this is highly irregular. Her position does not negate the fact that—" "That what?" the judge asked, his voice sharper now. "That she stood quietly, that she offered identification, that she complied." Reed stopped. The judge turned back to the screen. "What we just watched," he continued, "does not depict a sudden lapse in judgment. It depicts a pattern." Angela spoke again, gently, but the words carried weight. "This did not happen because I am a deputy director," she said. "It happened because, for a few seconds, I was perceived as someone who did not matter." Reed felt heat creep up his neck. "I want the record to reflect," Judge Caldwell said, "that the defendant did not raise her voice, did not resist, did not act aggressively." He looked directly at Reed. "Officer, your testimony suggested otherwise." Reed's mouth opened. No sound came out. The older security guard at the back lowered his arms, shaking his head slowly, as if a puzzle had finally snapped into place. The young clerk stared at Angela with something close to awe, the pieces of memory now aligning perfectly. Judge Caldwell removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This court has relied," he said, "on an assumption that was wrong." Angela did not press the moment. She did not smile. She did not accuse. She simply stood there, allowing the truth to exist without decoration. Reed understood something then that had never occurred to him before. This was not a trap, not a trick. She had not revealed herself to win. She had waited to be believed. And now the room had to confront why it had believed him instead. Judge Caldwell straightened. "Ms. Brooks," he said, "you chose not to invoke your position. Why?" Angela met his gaze. "Because justice that only works for the powerful is not justice, and silence, when chosen, can be a mirror." Reed looked down at his hands. He had not become this way in a moment. He had been this way for years, comfortable, protected, certain that the room would always lean toward him. This time, it had leaned too far. The truth did not reverse the events of the morning. It did not erase the cuffs or the stares or the humiliation. It did something far more dangerous. It exposed how easily the room had trusted the wrong voice. And as that realization settled in, everyone understood the same thing at once. The room had not changed because the truth was spoken. It had changed because they realized they had believed a lie. The sound of footsteps approaching from the side door cut through the stillness. 2 officers entered the courtroom, neither of them looking at Reed as a colleague anymore. Their expressions were professional, distant, stripped of familiarity. One carried a folder. The other kept his hands clasped behind his back, waiting. Judge Caldwell spoke first. "Officer Daniel Reed," he said, his voice steady but altered, as if something fundamental had shifted beneath it. "Based on the evidence presented and the contradictions between your sworn testimony and recorded footage, this court is ordering your immediate detention pending formal charges." For a moment, Reed did not react. He sat there, frozen, as if the words were meant for someone else. Someone who looked like him. Someone who had worn the same uniform. Someone who had always walked out of rooms like this without consequence. "Your Honor," Reed finally said, his voice thinner than he expected, "there's been a misunderstanding." No one moved. The officers stepped closer. "This isn't necessary," Reed added quickly. "I've served this courthouse for years. You know me." Judge Caldwell's eyes did not soften. "That," he replied, "is precisely the problem." The handcuffs came out again. This time, the sound echoed differently. Reed stood slowly, his movements stiff, mechanical. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, he flinched, just slightly, not from pain, but from recognition. The room he had controlled so effortlessly now watched him with the same quiet distance he had once shown others. Angela Brooks remained seated. She did not look at him as they led him away. Behind the scenes, things moved quickly. Too quickly for comfort. Internal Affairs requested files before the recess had even ended. Case numbers were pulled, names highlighted, patterns traced, arrest reports reread with new eyes. Complaints once dismissed as unfounded were suddenly reopened, examined not individually but together. One by one they came forward. A man who had spent 3 nights in jail for resisting an arrest that never should have happened. A woman whose charges were dropped quietly after months of delays and silence. A teenager, now grown, who had learned early that his word would never carry the same weight. They did not speak loudly. They did not celebrate. They simply existed in the open now. Reed's badge was removed that afternoon, his locker emptied by someone else, his name scrubbed from the duty roster before the day was over. The uniform that had once defined him folded neatly into a box he was no longer allowed to carry himself. What remained was not rage. It was absence. The absence of authority, of certainty, of the belief that someone would step in and smooth this over, that a supervisor would make a call, that a report would disappear, that the system would quietly return him to where he belonged. It did not. In a holding room down the hall, Reed sat alone, hands cuffed, staring at a blank wall. The badge that had given his life structure was gone. The role he had played for years had dissolved in a single morning. For the first time, he understood something he had never considered before. The system had never been behind him because he was right. It had been behind him because no one had looked too closely. Angela stood near the window at the end of the hall, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the courthouse steps. She felt no triumph, no relief. Only the quiet weight of truth settling where denial had lived for too long. Reed had not lost everything because of one bad decision. He had lost it because for decades, no one had dared to see him clearly. And now, finally, the room had. In the weeks that followed, the courthouse returned to its routines. Calendars filled, dockets moved, voices echoed through the same halls as if nothing extraordinary had happened. On the surface, the building looked unchanged. Stone still cold, floors still polished, rules still posted on the walls. But something fundamental had shifted. Angela Brooks returned to her office on the 4th floor the very next morning. Same desk, same window, same stack of files waiting to be reviewed. She wore no expression of victory, no visible mark of what the building had tried and failed to take from her. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like she had simply resumed her role. And in a way, she had. She did not give interviews. She did not call press conferences. She declined invitations to speak about what had happened, even as rumors spread beyond the courthouse walls. When colleagues offered sympathy or outrage on her behalf, she thanked them politely and redirected the conversation back to work. Revenge had never been the point. Accuracy was. She ensured that the footage from that morning was preserved, cataloged, and entered into official record. She requested reviews, not punishments, audits, not statements, processes rewritten in careful language that left no room for assumption. Every report was corrected, every timeline aligned, every word documented exactly as it had occurred. The system resisted at first, not openly, quietly. Delays appeared, questions were raised, old habits tried to reassert themselves, but the difference now was visibility. Once the truth had been seen clearly, it could not be unseen. Policies changed, training modules were rewritten, oversight expanded, complaints that once vanished into filing cabinets were tracked, connected, examined in context instead of isolation. No one announced these changes as reform. They were simply corrections. Angela sat in meetings where her name was spoken with a new tone, one that carried a mix of respect and discomfort. She noticed it and said nothing. Power that needed to be acknowledged out loud had never interested her. What mattered was that the record reflected reality. Officer Reed's name became a footnote in a much longer conversation, not a monster, not an anomaly. A consequence. A mirror held up to a system that had grown used to looking away. Angela thought often about the silence of that first courtroom, how easily it had accepted the wrong story, how quickly it had leaned toward authority instead of truth. She did not blame the room. She understood it. Systems, like people, followed the paths they were never forced to question. On a quiet afternoon, she walked past the same entrance where it had all begun. The stone steps looked no different. People moved in and out without hesitation. No one stopped her. No one questioned her presence. She paused for just a moment, then continued inside. Justice, she knew, was not loud by nature. It did not arrive to punish or to perform. It arrived to reveal, to show people who they had been when they thought no one was watching. The room had not changed because someone demanded it. It had changed because silence had held up a mirror long enough for the truth to appear. The room didn't change because someone shouted. It changed because silence finally spoke.